He didn't just ask for a divorce, he erased her. For 22 years, Eleonora Vance was the silent architect of Damien Blackwood's world. She wasn't just his wife. She was the curator of his life, the hostess of his triumphs, the woman who turned their cold, sprawling mansion into a home. Then came Kenzie, younger, hungrier, and infinitely more ruthless. In a single evening, Eleonora was dispossessed, thrown out of the palace she built with nothing but a suitcase and the echo of her husband's laughter. But they underestimated her. They thought she was just a wife. They forgot she was the one who drew the blueprints. The evening air in the Bel Air Hills was usually Eleonora's favorite, scented with night-blooming jasmine and the faint, clean aroma of money. But on this Tuesday, the air felt suffocating heavy with unspoken words. Damien was late, which wasn't unusual for the CEO of Blackwood Ventures, a man who treated time as another asset to be leveraged. Eleonora, however, felt a prickle of unease that had been growing for months. It was in the clipped phone calls, the unexplained weekend trips, the way his eyes, once full of shared ambition, now slid past her as if she were part of the furniture. She straightened a silver-framed photo on the grand piano, a picture of them from 10 years ago, smiling on the deck of a yacht in Monaco. His arm was tight around her, his smile genuine. She remembered the feeling of his linen shirt against her cheek, the taste of salt on his lips. Where did that man go? He had been replaced by this new version, a man encased in a shell of bespoke suits and icy ambition. The purr of a high-performance engine sliced through the quiet. Not Damien's usual chauffeured sedan, but the guttural roar of his limited-edition McLaren, the one he called his weekend toy. The front door opened, and Damien strode in. At 50, he was still a formidable presence, tall, impeccably fit, with a mane of silvered hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. But tonight, his face was set in a mask of grim resolution. He wasn't alone. Trailing behind him was a young woman who looked like she'd been sculpted by algorithms and ambition. She was all sharp angles, pouty lips, and a mane of blonde hair that fell in a perfect, careless cascade. She wore a dress that was little more than a whisper of fabric, clinging to a body, honed by Pilates and self-awareness. Her eyes, wide and deceptively innocent, scanned the cavernous foyer of the Serafina estate with an unnerving sense of appraisal. "Eleonora," Damien said, his voice devoid of warmth. He didn't move to kiss her as he once might have. He stood by the door, a general surveying a battlefield. "This is Kenzie Monroe." The girl, Kenzie, gave a small, unimpressed wave. "Hey." Eleonora's heart began a slow, painful drumbeat against her ribs. She looked from her husband to the girl and back again. The air crackled with the sheer audacity of it. "Damien, what is this? We need to talk," he said, striding into the grand salon, the room where they had hosted senators, tech moguls, and artists. It was a room Eleonora had designed, from the custom silk rugs to the imposing abstract expressionist painting above the marble fireplace. He poured himself a generous measure of Macallan 25, not offering her one. Kenzie followed him, perching on the arm of the sofa, like a sleek, predatory cat. She ran a manicured finger over the velvet, her expression unreadable. "I don't think we need an audience for this conversation," Eleonora said, her voice trembling slightly. She refused to let her composure shatter in front of this girl. Damien took a long swallow of his scotch. "Kenzie is not an audience. She's the subject. We're in love, Eleonora." The words, so clichés, so brutally simple, hit her with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. 22 years. 2 decades of building this life, of subsuming her own dreams to fuel his, of being the bedrock upon which he built his empire. All of it undone by a 5-word sentence. In love, she repeated the words, tasting like ash. Damien, we've been married for 22 years. We built this life together. Let's be honest, Nora, he scoffed, using the diminutive name he knew she hated. I built this empire. You arranged the flowers. It was a good partnership, but it's run its course. I need something. More. I need passion, vitality. He gestured vaguely toward Kenzie, who preened under the attention. Kenzie gives me that. I see. Eleonora said, a chilling calm beginning to settle over her shock. And what about our partnership, our vows? They were for a different time, he said dismissively. People change. I've changed. You haven't. He put the glass down with a decisive click. I want a divorce. My lawyer, Mr. Roth, will be in touch with you tomorrow. He'll explain the terms of the prenup. The prenup. The document she'd signed in a haze of love and trust 2 decades ago, a document his team of lawyers had drafted to be as ironclad as a bank vault. She remembered her own lawyer at the time, a kind, small-time practitioner, advising her against it, saying it left her with virtually nothing. But she had trusted Damien. She had loved him. You're throwing me out, she whispered, the reality of the situation crashing down. It's my house, Eleonora. My name is on the deed, he said, his voice laced with implacance. Frankly, I'm surprised you'd want to stay. It would be awkward. Kenzie finally spoke, her voice, a high, chirpy sound that grated on Eleonora's nerves. Dami thinks it's best to make a clean break, for everyone's emotional health. Dami? Eleonora looked at her husband, this stranger who wore his face. You're taking advice on my emotional health from her. Don't be difficult, Damien snapped. This is happening. I've had my staff pack a few of your things. Clothes, personal effects. They're in the foyer. Eleonora felt a wave of dizziness. She glanced toward the hall and saw it for the first time, 2 sleek monogrammed suitcases standing by the door. Her suitcases. It was all pre-planned. The cruelty was breathtaking. He hadn't come to discuss. He'd come to inform. To execute. You packed my bags. I'm trying to make this as painless as possible. He said, a statement so absurd it bordered on insane. Painless. A laugh, sharp and brittle, escaped her lips. You bring your mistress into our home, announce you're leaving me after 2 decades, and inform me my bags are packed. What part of that is painless, Damien? The part where you accept it with dignity, he said coldly. Don't make a scene, it's unbecoming. Kenzie stood up and sauntered over to Damien, wrapping her arms around his neck. Baby, maybe I should go upstairs. Let you 2 finish up. She kissed his cheek, leaving a smear of gloss. I can start thinking about what to do with the master closet. The lighting in there is like tragic for selfies. The casual ownership in the girl's voice was the final twisting knife. The master closet she had designed with a custom seating area and a skylight. This child was talking about remodeling it for her social media posts. Eleonora stood up, her spine ramrod straight. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated ice. She looked at Damien, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years, she saw him not as her husband, but as an opponent. The prenup, Damien, she said, her voice low and steady. It outlines what I'm entitled to from the liquid assets accumulated during our marriage. but it says nothing about the foundational assets that existed before the papers were signed. Damien waved a dismissive hand. There were no foundational assets. I was a junior analyst with a dream. You were a curator's assistant. We had nothing. Are you sure about that? Eleonora asked, a flicker of something he couldn't decipher in her eyes. Are you absolutely certain you started with nothing? He frowned, irritated by the change in her demeanor. He had expected tears pleading. This cold fury was unsettling. I know my own history, Eleonora. Now I think it's time for you to go. I have a car waiting to take you to the Beverly Hills Hotel. You can stay there until you make more permanent arrangements. He was handing her off like a problem to be managed. A hotel, as if she were a visiting business associate. She walked past him, past the smirking girl, and stopped at the 2 suitcases in the foyer. She didn't look back. You will regret this, Damien, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. You will regret this more than anything you have ever done in your life. I doubt that, he called after her. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, Eleonora didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a hollow, echoing chasm in her chest. Outside, a black town car sat purring at the curb. The driver, a man who had driven her for years, opened the door, his eyes full of pity. She got in without a word, her mind already spinning, moving past the grief and into the cold, clear realm of strategy. Damien was right about one thing. He had built an empire. But he'd forgotten who gave him the cornerstone. The suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel was opulent, a gilded cage of pink and green motifs that felt both mocking and suffocating. For 2 days, Eleonora barely moved. She ordered room service she didn't eat, and stared out the window at the palm trees, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's vacation. The news broke quickly, as it always does in a town fueled by gossip. Billionaire Damien Blackwood steps out with influencer Kendall Kenzie Monroe. The articles were salacious and swift, painting Eleonora as the aging, discarded wife, a relic of a bygone era. They used a photo of her from a charity gala 5 years ago, looking elegant but severe, juxtaposed with a recent paparazzi shot of Kenzie laughing vibrant and carefree on the arm of her husband. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from concerned friends, pitying acquaintances and a few triumphant rivals. She ignored them all except for one. Clara. Clara Reed was not a Bel Air friend. She was a pre-Damien friend, a college roommate who had become one of New York's most respected art historians. She was sharp, witty, and had never been impossessed by Damien's wealth. When Eleonora finally answered, Clara's voice was a lifeline of sanity. I'm booking a flight, Clara said. No preamble needed. Don't, Eleonora said, her voice raspy. Not yet. I need to think. Ellie, he threw you out. The gossip sites are calling you the ghost of Serafina Estate. You don't need to think you need to fight. I know, Eleonora whispered. That's what I'm doing. I'm thinking about how to fight. After the call, something shifted. The fog of shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, lucid anger. Damien had called her a flower arranger. He had dismissed her role in his life as decorative. He had forgotten the woman she was before she became Mrs. Blackwood. She had forgotten too. She pushed the untouched tray of food aside and walked to her suitcase. Beneath the folded silks and cashmeres was a worn leather portfolio she had insisted on packing herself. It contained her past, her identity. She pulled out a small, unassuming key. It wasn't for a house or a car. It was for a safe deposit box at a private, nondescript bank in downtown Los Angeles. A box she had maintained under her maiden name Eleonora Vance for 23 years. The next morning, she didn't call the hotel's car service. She took a taxi, a deliberate choice to move through the city anonymously. The bank was a stark, modern building, a world away from the lavishness of Bel Air. Inside, the air was cool and silent. She was led to a small, private viewing room. The clerk brought in box 713, a long, heavy metal container. Her hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key. She hadn't opened this box in over a decade. Inside, nestled among a few pieces of her grandmother's jewelry and her old university degree in art history and business administration, was a single, thick document bound in dark blue cardstock. The title on the cover was simple: Project Chimera, a diversified angel investment strategy. Dated 1 year before her marriage. Authored by Eleonora Vance. Her fingers traced the letters. It all came rushing back. Damien then wasn't the titan he was today. He was a smart, ambitious analyst at a large investment firm, frustrated and hitting a glass ceiling. He had the charm and the eye for a deal, but he lacked a unique, overarching strategy. He saw individual trees. He couldn't envision the forest. She, on the other hand, was working at a small independent art gallery, but her mind had always been drawn to patterns, to finding value where others saw none. She saw the art world not just as aesthetics, but as a market of undervalued assets. She spent a year in her spare time developing a new investment model. It wasn't about art. It was about applying the principles of art valuation: provenance, scarcity, cultural impact, and emerging talent to the burgeoning tech startup scene. It proposed a fund, Chimera, that would make small strategic investments in a wide portfolio of nascent tech companies, betting on the collective potential rather than a single home run. It was a detailed 100-page business plan, complete with market analysis, risk assessment, and a 5-year growth projection. She had given it to Damien, her brilliant, driven boyfriend, as a gift. "This is for you," she'd said. "This is how you build your own kingdom." He had been stunned by its depth and foresight. He'd used it almost word for word to secure his first round of seed funding. He didn't call it Chimera, of course. He named it Blackwood Ventures. Her name was never mentioned. At the time, she hadn't cared. His success was their success. She was in love, and she was content to be the silent partner, the secret architect. They were a team. Now that naivete seemed like a fatal flaw. But Eleonora had been smart in one crucial way. Before she gave him the plan on the advice of her cautious father, she had taken it to a notary. Tucked into the back of the document was a notarized affidavit, signed and dated, stating that this intellectual property, this entire business model, was her sole creation. She had also kept a copy of the original partnership agreement they had both signed before he even approached his first investor. It was a simple 1-page document they downloaded online, stating a 50-50 split in the founding venture. When his lawyers later presented her with the prenup, which superseded all other claims after the date of marriage, no one ever thought to ask about a prior business partnership agreement that was never formally dissolved. It was the ghost in the machine of his fortune. Damien had built $100 billion empire on this foundation, and he'd forgotten who laid the first stone. Her phone rang. It was Damien's lawyer, Charles Roth, a man whose voice oozed condescending politeness. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began. "I trust you've had time to process. We'd like to schedule a meeting to go over the nuptial agreement. Damien is prepared to be very fair." Eleonora held the Chimera document in her lap. The ice in her veins was now steel. Fair Mr. Roth? That's interesting. I believe your client's definition of fair and mine are about to diverge significantly. I assure you the agreement is ironclad. I'm not interested in discussing the prenup. Eleonora cut in her voice, ringing with newfound authority. You see, Mr. Roth, you and your client are operating under a false assumption. You believe your primary negotiation is with Damien's wife. That's a mistake. Your negotiation is with his founding partner. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I don't understand. You will, Eleonora said calmly. I won't be needing the hotel for much longer, and I won't be the one making arrangements. Please inform Mr. Blackwood that my legal counsel will be in touch with him within 48 hours. Her name is Evelyn Reed. She hung up before he could respond. Evelyn Reed. The name was a legend in Los Angeles legal circles. A shark in a Chanel suit, a litigator so fearsome and effective that other lawyers settled the moment they saw her name on a filing. She was expensive, ruthless, and exactly what Eleonora needed. Eleonora Vance Blackwood, the discarded wife, was gone. In her place sat Eleonora Vance, the majority stakeholder of a ghost corporation that was about to come back and haunt the man who had tried to erase her. She walked out of the bank, leaving the key to box 713 on the counter. She wouldn't need it anymore. The past was no longer something to be stored away. It was ammunition. Evelyn Reed's office was not what Eleonora expected. Instead of the intimidating mahogany and leather of Damien's lawyers, it was a minimalist space high in a downtown skyscraper, all glass and white marble with a panoramic view of the city. The only color came from a massive, vibrant Joan Mitchell painting a canvas of chaotic, beautiful energy. Evelyn Reed herself was like her office, sleek, formidable, and radiating an almost ascetic power. She was a woman in her late 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp geometric bob, and eyes that seemed to see right through artifice and into the heart of a problem. She listened without interruption as Eleonora laid out the entire 22-year history, her voice never wavering. She then placed the Project Chimera document and the one-page partnership agreement on the polished white desk. Evelyn picked it up, her long fingers handling the paper with a surgeon's care. She read silently for nearly 20 minutes, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up, and for the first time, a slow, predatory smile touched her lips. "My God," she said softly. "It's the Rosetta Stone." "He forgot," Eleonora said. Or he chose to forget. He built his entire identity on the idea of being a self-made man. Admitting this was my work would shatter that. "Shatter is an understatement, Mrs. Blackwood," Evelyn said, her eyes gleaming. "This document, properly notarized and predating the marriage and the prenup, this isn't a claim for alimony. This is a claim for foundational ownership. You're not asking for a piece of the pie. You're claiming you own the entire bakery and the recipe for the bread. What does it mean legally? It means that Blackwood Ventures was technically a partnership from its inception, a partnership he never legally dissolved. He absorbed it into his corporate identity without ever acknowledging or compensating his partner. You. For 23 years, every acquisition, every stock split, every dividend, half of it was legally yours. The prenup is irrelevant. It governs marital assets, not pre-existing business assets. Eleonora felt a surge of vindication so powerful it almost made her dizzy. "So what do we do?" Evelyn leaned forward, the smile gone replaced by the focused intensity of a predator. "We don't do what he expects. We don't file a messy public lawsuit. That would take years, and the media would turn it into a circus. Damien Blackwood is a man who lives and dies by his public image and his stock price. So that's where we apply pressure, quietly, and with devastating force. The plan was simple and brutal. Evelyn's team would draft a letter of intent to sue not for divorce, but for breach of partnership fraud and unjust enrichment. The letter, along with a certified copy of the Chimera document and the partnership agreement, would not be sent to Charles Roth. It would be sent directly to the independent board members of Blackwood Ventures and to the company's chief counsel. The board has a fiduciary duty to the shareholders, Evelyn explained. An ownership claim of this magnitude, backed by this kind of evidence, represents an existential threat to the company. It throws the legality of Damien's entire stock ownership into question. They can't ignore it. They can't hide it. They will have to act. And what will Damien do? Eleonora asked. First, he will panic. Then he will get very, very angry. Finally, he will be forced to the negotiating table, not as a powerful billionaire dictating terms to his ex-wife, but as a CEO facing a catastrophic crisis that could wipe him out completely. Meanwhile, at the Serafina estate, life was a curated fantasy. Kenzie Monroe was in her element documenting her new life for her millions of followers. There were videos of her doing yoga by the infinity pool story posts, of her trying on clothes in Eleonora's former closet, now with a selfie station and ring light and a live stream, where she gave a tour of the kitchen, laughing about how she couldn't even work the high-tech espresso machine. Damien found it all vaguely irritating, but tolerated it as part of the package. He was busy celebrating his freedom. He and Kenzie hosted a lavish party, a new beginnings celebration. It was younger, louder, and crasser than Eleonora's elegant soirees. The music thumped, the champagne flowed, and Kenzie was the glittering center of attention. Damien stood on the terrace watching her. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name. The party felt hollow, the people sycophantic. He was used to being surrounded by power, by people who challenged him. These were people who wanted a photo with him. Kenzie ran over, phone in hand. "Dame, let's get a pic." #power couple, she said, making a kissy face. As she snapped the photo, his phone buzzed. It was Marcus Thorne, the lead director on his board, an old friend. "Damien," Marcus said, his voice tight with a tension Damien had never heard before. "We have a problem, a 5-alarm fire. I'm sending you a file our chief counsel just received. You need to look at it now." "Can it wait?" "I'm in the middle of something," Damien said, annoyed. "No, Damien, it cannot wait," Marcus snapped. "Your something is about to become nothing if you don't read this email." Frowning, Damien walked to his study, the one place that was still his sanctuary. He opened his laptop, the bass from the party vibrating through the floor. He found the email from Marcus. The subject line read, "Urgent and confidential pre-litigation notice from counsel for Eleonora Vance." He snorted. Vance? She was using her maiden name. How dramatic. He opened the attached PDF. He read the first page, then the second. He scrolled down and saw the scanned image of the Project Chimera cover. His blood ran cold. He kept scrolling, his breathing becoming shallow. He saw the notarized signature page. He saw the simple, forgotten partnership agreement he'd signed in his tiny pre-marriage apartment. The music from the party seemed to fade away. The thumping bass was now the sound of his own heart pounding in his ears. It was real. He had built his entire world on a foundation of sand, and the tide was coming in. His carefully constructed universe, his identity as the lone genius, His entire net worth, it was all predicated on a lie, a theft. And Eleonora had the receipt. His office door burst open. It was Kenzie pouting. "Everyone's leaving. You disappeared. You're ruining the vibe." He looked at her perfectly made-up face and vacant eyes, and for the first time he saw her not as a prize, but as a liability. A ridiculously expensive, vapid liability. "Get out," he said, his voice a low growl. What's wrong with you?" she whined. "I said get out," he roared, standing up so abruptly his chair flew back and hit the wall. The sheer fury in his face made her recoil. She turned and fled, slamming the door behind her. Damien sank into his chair, the legal document glowing on his screen. He was ruined. Eleonora wasn't coming for half of the marital assets. She was coming for half of everything. And she had him completely and utterly checkmated. His only option was to settle, and the price would be astronomical. He started to laugh, a dry, ragged sound of pure despair. The flower arranger was about to take him for everything he had. The days that followed were a blur of frantic, hushed meetings for Damien. The party was a distant memory, replaced by the grim reality of damage control. He assembled his legal team, the Sharks, who had drafted the ironclad prenup. They read Evelyn Reed's notice, their faces growing paler with each page. "The partnership agreement is legitimate," Charles Roth admitted, his voice strained, "and the Chimera document is clearly the foundational blueprint for Blackwood Ventures. Her claim it's strong, frighteningly so." "So what do we do?" Damien demanded, pacing his office like a caged lion. "We fight it. We bury her in litigation." "Against Evelyn Reed," Roth said with a grimace. "That's a war of attrition we can't win, especially not with the board breathing down our necks. They've already called an emergency meeting. They see this as a material risk to the company's valuation. If this goes public, the stock will plummet. Shareholders will sue the board for concealing the risk. They will throw you to the wolves to save themselves, Damien." The reality was dawning on him. He had no leverage. Eleonora and Evelyn Reed held all the cards. They hadn't just cornered him. They had built the trap he was in and patiently waited for him to walk into it. The pressure from Kenzie was an added torment. With the parties over and the shopping sprees curtailed by Damien's dark mood, she was bored and resentful. "What is going on?" she'd demand daily. "You're acting like the world is ending. Did that old hag really do something? This is none of your business," he'd snap. "It is my business," she shrieked during one argument in the vast marble kitchen. "I'm with you now. Your life is my life. I didn't sign up for this doom and gloom crap. I was supposed to be the new Mrs. Blackwood, not the girlfriend of some stressed-out, broke old guy." The word broke hung in the air between them. It was his greatest fear, and she had just thrown it in his face. He saw in that moment the transactional nature of their relationship with blinding clarity. He was not a man to her. He was a provider of a lifestyle. When that lifestyle was threatened, her affection vanished. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's my house, too," she retorted. "No, it isn't," he said, advancing on her. "Nothing is yours. It's all mine. And I'm telling you to get out." Her retreat was as swift and undignified as her arrival had been triumphant. Within hours, she had packed her designer luggage, hailed an Uber, and vanished from his life, leaving behind only a few stray false eyelashes and the lingering scent of her cloying perfume. Her subsequent social media posts painted her as a victim who had escaped a toxic situation, a final petty act of revenge. Damien barely noticed. He was already in a deeper, more profound hell. The settlement negotiation was not a negotiation at all. It was a surrender. Evelyn Reed laid out the terms in a sterile conference room. Eleonora was not present. Evelyn wanted it to be purely business, free from emotion. So Vance is entitled to 50% of the total value of Blackwood Ventures and all its holdings, retroactive to its founding, Evelyn stated, sliding a valuation report across the table. The number was staggering, a figure with so many commas it looked like a telephone number. It was in the tens of billions. However, she has no desire to be your business partner or to dismantle the company you have built. Damien let out a short, bitter laugh. How generous of her. She is prepared, Evelyn continued, ignoring him, to sign over her 50% ownership stake and dissolve the original partnership agreement for a one-time liquid settlement. Her price is $5 billion. Damien's lawyers gasped. That's impossible, Roth stammered. He can't liquidate that amount of capital without gutting the company. That is his problem, not ours, Evelyn said coolly. He has 30 days to transfer the funds, or we proceed with filing our lawsuit, which will be made public. I suspect the board will find a way to make it happen to avoid that outcome. They are quite motivated. They were. The board, terrified of the fallout, arranged a massive line of credit leveraged against Damien's own controlling shares. He was forced to sell off Art, a fleet of cars, his penthouse in New York, and his private jet. He was being systematically stripped of the trappings of his power, all to pay the woman he had discarded. The final piece of the puzzle was the Serafina estate. It was his crown jewel, his monument to himself. But it was also one of his most valuable liquid assets, valued at over $100 million. He had to sell it. The news that the legendary Bel-Air mansion was going on the market created a frenzy. It was to be a sealed bid auction, handled by a prestigious international realty firm, to ensure privacy and maximize the price. Damien was forced to vacate, moving into a temporary suite at the same Beverly Hills hotel he had sent Eleonora to. The irony was not lost on him. He would see her sometimes across the Polo Lounge, looking serene and powerful in a meeting with Evelyn Reed or a group of art world figures who had once courted him. She never looked his way. It was as if he no longer existed. He had tried to erase her, and in a stunning reversal of fortune, she had succeeded in erasing him. The day of the auction arrived. Damien sat in his hotel suite, drinking, waiting for the call from the realtor. Bids had come in from Russian oligarchs, Silicon Valley, tech billionaires, and Middle Eastern royalty. He hoped it would sell for a record-breaking price. It was the only victory he could hope for in this utter defeat. At 5 p.m. his phone rang. It was the lead agent, a woman named Juliana. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice electric with excitement. "We have a truly extraordinary result." "Just tell me the number, Juliana," he said wearily. "The winning bid is $150 million, she said. $25 million over the highest competing offer. It's a new record for the area." Damien felt a small, hollow flicker of pride. Who was it? The Russian? No. Juliana said, a strange note in her voice. The winning bid was submitted this morning through a newly formed LLC based in Delaware. The entity is called Chimera Holdings. Damien froze the glass halfway to his lips. Chimera. The name from the document. The name of her ghost company. Who is the principal of Chimera Holdings? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. There was a pause. The sole principal is listed as Eleonora Vance. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. She hadn't just taken his money. She had bought his kingdom right out from under him. The house he had thrown her out of was now hers. It was the ultimate, most elegant, and most brutal checkmate. The moving trucks that pulled up to the gates of the Serafina estate were not filled with new furniture. They were filled with Eleonora's old life, the pieces she had carefully curated and put into climate-controlled storage when she married Damien. Her art books, her antique writing desk, her collection of mid-century pottery, and most importantly her paintings. Not the sterile investment-grade abstracts Damien had favoured, but the art she truly loved, the works of female artists he had dismissed as unimportant. Eleonora arrived not in a chauffeured town car, but in her own vintage convertible, a car she had owned before her marriage and kept meticulously maintained. She drove it herself, the warm California wind in her hair. She felt lighter than she had in years. As she walked through the vast echoing foyer, she wasn't seeing the ghost of her past life. She was seeing a blank canvas. The house had been professionally emptied and cleaned as a condition of the sale. Damien's heavy masculine furniture was gone. Kenzie's tacky temporary additions had been erased. The house was silent, waiting. She spent the first few hours just walking through the rooms, reclaiming them. This wasn't the home she had been thrown out of. This was a property she had acquired. The psychological difference was immense. She ran her hand along the cool marble of the fireplace mantel, not as Mrs. Blackwood, but as the owner. Her friend Clara had flown in finally to help. "I have to admit," Clara said, uncorking a bottle of champagne in the cavernous, empty kitchen, "this is the most gangster thing I have ever witnessed. You didn't just get revenge. You staged a corporate and real estate coup of epic proportions." Eleonora laughed, a real, genuine laugh. He saw the house as a symbol of his power. It felt fitting to take that symbol away from him. "What are you going to do with it?" Clara asked, handing her a glass. "It's so huge. Are you going to sell it?" "Live in it alone." "Neither." Eleonora said, a thoughtful look in her eyes. She walked to the massive windows overlooking the Los Angeles basin. This house was always a showcase, a place for Damien to show off his success. "I want to turn it into something else." Her plan was already forming. She would live here, yes, but not alone. She would transform the Serafina estate. The Grand Salon would become a gallery space dedicated to underrepresented female artists. The guest wings would be converted into a residency program, offering studio space and stipends for emerging creators. The house would no longer be a monument to one man's ego, but a foundation to launch the careers of many talented women. It would be funded by her new foundation, the Chimera Project. As they were planning, the sound of a car, screeching to a halt in the driveway, startled them. Eleonora looked out the window, and her heart steeled itself. It was Damien. He had gotten past the front gate somehow, likely by using an old code that hadn't been changed yet. "Stay here," Eleonora told Clara. "This is something I have to do alone." She walked to the front door and opened it just as he was raising his hand to pound on it. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had lost the aura of invincible confidence that had once defined him. He looked like what he was, a man who had been utterly defeated. "Eleonora," he said, his voice raw. "We need to talk." "There's nothing left to talk about, Damien," she said, her voice calm. She didn't move from the doorway, blocking his entry. "How could you do this?" he asked, gesturing wildly at the house. "Take my money, fine, but the house, this was our home." "No," she corrected him gently. "It was your house. You made that very clear. And now it's my house. I have the deed to prove it." He flinched. "Ellie, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was arrogant. I was a fool. That girl, she meant nothing. It was a midlife crisis, a cliché. I see that, I see that now. You see it now because your net worth has been decimated and your reputation is in tatters, she stated without malice. It was just a fact. You didn't see it when you were telling me my contributions to our life were arranging flowers. He had the grace to look ashamed. That was cruel. I was cruel. I am sorry, Eleonora. Truly sorry. I look back on our life together. It was good. We were a team. I miss you. I miss us. He was trying to appeal to the 22 years of shared history, to the woman he thought still loved him, the woman who would take him back. But that woman no longer existed. He had killed her that night he brought Kenzie home. You don't miss me, Damien, she said, and her words were not angry, but filled with a profound final clarity. You miss the life you had. You miss the woman who managed your world so you could conquer it. You miss your silent partner, but you never actually saw me. The real me. The woman who wrote the plan for Project Chimera. You buried her, and you expected her to stay buried. She stepped back, ready to close the door. I am not angry anymore. I'm just done. I wish you well, Damien. I hope you find a way to rebuild. But you will not be doing it with me, and you will not be doing it here. He looked past her into the vast, empty foyer of the house that was once his. He saw the potential, the grandeur, all the things he had lost. But when he looked back at her, he finally saw the stranger she had become, powerful, independent, and utterly out of his reach. Defeated, he turned without another word and walked back to his rental car. Eleonora closed the heavy oak door, the click echoing in the hall. It was the sound of the final chapter of her old life ending, and the first chapter of her new one beginning. She leaned against the door for a moment, took a deep breath, and then turned back to her friend, a smile spreading across her face. The Queen was home. 6 months felt like a lifetime. The imposing iron gates that once guarded the Serafina estate, a symbol of exclusive and formidable power, now swung open with a welcoming grace. The nameplate, once a polished brass plaque that simply read Blackwood, had been replaced by a burnished bronze sign bearing the elegant script, the Chimera Arts Foundation. The transformation was more than symbolic. It was seismic, a fundamental reimagining of purpose that permeated every stone and blade of grass. Eleonora had orchestrated the metamorphosis with the precision of a master curator and the vision of a revolutionary. She didn't just redecorate, she deconstructed the very soul of the mansion and rebuilt it. The cavernous, intimidating grand salon, once a stage for Damien's corporate theatre, with its cold leather sofas and imposing investment-grade art, was now a soaring gallery space. The walls, painted a soft gallery white, were alive with a riot of colour and form, massive expressive canvases by a young painter from Seoul. Intricate fibre art by a woman from Nairobi, and challenging photography by an artist from Berlin. The air, once sterile and scented with Damien's expensive cigars, now smelled of oil paint, fresh flowers, and the faint, promising aroma of brewing coffee from the newly installed espresso bar in the corner, a hub for conversation and collaboration. Damien's state-of-the-art home theatre, a dark cave where he'd entertained clients with blockbuster films, had been gutted. It was now the Vance Auditorium, a light-filled lecture hall with tiered seating, a stage, and acoustic paneling perfect for artist talks, poetry readings, and panel discussions. The sprawling, temperature-controlled wine cellar no longer housed thousands of bottles of Bordeaux Damien collected but never drank, Half of it was converted into a dark room and digital media lab, while the other half stored art supplies. The most profound change occurred in the guest wings. The 6 opulent but lifeless suites were now vibrant, functional live work studios. Each of the Foundation's first resident artists, the inaugural class of the Chimera Fellowship, had a private space to sleep, think, and create. The fellowship was Eleonora's masterstroke, a program that provided female-identifying artists with a generous stipend housing materials and, most importantly, the freedom from financial worry for 1 year. It was the kind of support she in her youth could only have dreamed of. Meanwhile, Damien Blackwood was learning a new and bitter vocabulary, one that included words like oversight, austerity, and consequence. He still sat at the head of the boardroom table at Blackwood Ventures, but the chair felt different. He was the chairman, but his power was gelded. A new cautious board installed after the near-catastrophic settlement watched his every move. His controlling shares had been leveraged and sold off to pay Eleonora, leaving him a wealthy man, but not an untouchable titan. He was mortal, and the entire financial world knew it. One afternoon, sitting in his new offensively beige condominium in Century City, he saw a feature on a financial news network. Not about him, but about the new patrons of LA. The segment opened with a sweeping drone shot of the Serafina estate, his former kingdom now gleaming in the sun. The reporter's voiceover was effusive, praising the Chimera Arts Foundation as the most exciting and disruptive force in the art world today. They cut to an interview with Eleonora. She was standing in what used to be his study, in front of a stunning triptych that pulsed with energy. She looked radiant, speaking with an articulate passion he hadn't seen in her for 20 years. She talked about art not as an asset class, but as a vital cultural conversation. She looked younger, happier, and more powerful than he had ever known her to be. He switched the television off with a vicious stab of his finger, the silence of his sterile apartment pressing in on him. He had lost more than a house. He had lost a legacy he never even knew was his to begin with. The culmination of Eleonora's 6 months of work was the Foundation's inaugural public reception. The evening was perfect, the air warm and fragrant. The house was alive, filled not with the sycophants and corporate raiders of Damien's parties, but with a dizzying, eclectic mix of people-celebrated museum curators, scrappy young artists in paint-splattered jeans, sharp-tongued art critics, university students with wide, eager eyes, and collectors who were there not just to invest, but to discover. Eleonora moved through the crowd, a gracious and commanding presence in a deep sapphire gown. She wasn't playing the role of hostess. She was the institution's heart and mind. "You've done it, Ellie," Clara whispered, coming to her side with 2 glasses of champagne. "You didn't just buy the house back. You exorcismed it." Eleonora accepted the glass, her eyes scanning the joyful, chaotic scene in her former grand salon. It was never about the house, not really. It was about taking back the space both literally and figuratively. He thought this place defined his power. I think power is about what you can build, not just what you can own. As she spoke, a young woman with ink-stained fingers and shining eyes rushed up to them. It was Maria, a sculptor from the residency program who worked with reclaimed metal. "Miss Vance, it happened," Maria breathed, clutching a small catalogue to her chest. "Anton Dubois. The Anton Dubois. He just spent 20 minutes at my installation. He called it ferociously intelligent. And the Guggenheim curator wants a studio visit next week." "That's wonderful, Maria, but not surprising," Eleonora said, placing a reassuring hand on the young woman's arm. "Your work speaks for itself. All you needed was a room loud enough for its voice to be heard." Just then, the man himself, Anton Dubois, approached. He was a notoriously cynical art critic for a major New York publication, a man whose scathing reviews could wither a career. He was impeccably dressed with a look of severe intellectualism. "Vance," he began, his tone neutral. "An impressive evening." "Mr. Dubois," Eleonora greeted him calmly. "I'm glad you could come. I hope you found something to your liking." "I found it unexpected," he conceded, which from him was high praise. He gestured around the room. "When I heard a billionaire's ex-wife had started a foundation, I expected a vanity project. Tax-deductible dilettantism. This He paused, his critical eye sweeping over a challenging piece of video art. "Is not that. This has teeth. It's a serious curatorial statement." "My goal wasn't to collect art that is likable, Mr. Dubois," Eleonora replied, her voice even and confident. "It was to support artists who are essential. The market has a tendency to overlook voices it finds inconvenient. We're simply providing a better amplifier." Dubois considered her for a long moment. "You're funding the very artists your ex-husband's crowd would dismiss as a poor investment. It's a rather pointed form of philanthropy." A small, knowing smile touched Eleonora's lips. "Let's just say I have a newfound appreciation for assets whose true value isn't immediately obvious on a balance sheet." The critic actually chuckled a dry, rustling sound. "Well played, Miss Vance. Well played." He nodded once, a gesture of genuine respect, and moved on. The validation was complete. Later that night, when the last guests had departed and a soft quiet had settled over the estate, Eleonora walked out onto the main terrace alone. The lights of Los Angeles glittered below her like a carpet of scattered jewels. The house was no longer silent in the way it had been with Damien, an empty, lonely silence. This was a peaceful quiet, the hum of a place filled with purpose and sleeping dreams. She thought of Damien's final desperate appeal at her front door months ago. He had tried to summon the ghost of the woman she had been, but he didn't understand. A ghost is a remnant of the past. She was the architect of the future. Her victory wasn't in the billions of dollars or the ownership of the mansion. Her victory was in this moment, standing in the cool night air, in a home she had not just bought, but had truly created a place that now generated hope instead of just accumulating wealth. She had lost a husband and a life she thought was a pinnacle of success, only to discover it had been a gilded cage. Now she was free. The Queen was home, not because she had taken the castle, but because she had finally truly built her own kingdom. Eleonora's story is a powerful reminder that the end of one chapter is often the explosive beginning of another. From the ashes of a devastating betrayal, she didn't just rise. She built an entirely new empire on her own terms. She turned her greatest pain into her greatest source of power. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have fought back? If you were inspired by Eleonora's incredible journey from a discarded wife to the queen of her own castle, show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs a story of strength and empowerment. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story of justice and spectacular revenge. What story should we tell next? Let us know in the comments below.